So good morning team. Let me know if you're happy for me to begin.
Yes, this is all good. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So first thing to say, of course, is good morning to you all. I hope you weren't thrown out or confused by the time change. I'm very pleased to be with you, of course, this morning for the second in our series of 3 webinars focused on digital learning strategies. Before we go any further, I need to kind of just give you a wish. I hope all of you and your families are well at this difficult time. And as I said, thank you for joining us, coming together here this morning. So let's get started with this. What we're going to do, what I'd like to do is just take a minute or two just to focus on or give a quick review of what we talked about last week, just to set some context for today's session. Today's session is going to focus on how, in fact, we harness technology to build our own personalized digital learning strategies. And so just before we get into that, I think it's important that we talk a little bit, just remind ourselves of the conversation we had last week, okay? So last Monday morning, we opened our series of webinars with a chat about digital learning strategy. We actually spoke for, what, 40 minutes or so around the evolving role of technology in our lives and our organizations. And again, thank you to everybody who was able to join. For those of you who were unable to join, please feel free to access the recording online. Now, together, during that first webinar, we explored the evolving role of technology. And in today's and next week's webinars, we're going to build on the foundations that we laid last week to understand how we can harness technology to create personalized digital learning strategies. And then we'll conclude the series, but of course not our discussions and experiments, by sharing insights regarding how we can actually apply those insights into our teams, into our organizations, into our cities, and in fact, our societies as well. So last Monday, we went on a little bit of a journey together. The aimed destination last week was to arrive at a point where we could understand and explain to others practical examples of what digital learning actually is, how we might think about disruptive technology, and where the technology revolution of the last 50 years has actually brought us to. You'll remember, those of you who were with us last week, that we defined digital learning as the practice of achieving learning outcomes through a considered and focused application of technology. We visited Ghana early on to show how the team at Toaston are using mobile technologies to tackle the paralyzing impact of illiteracy. Then closer to home, in Morocco, in the US, in the UK, in Spain, we outlined some experiments with virtual realities and telepresence robotics that we're actually conducting at OCP and UM6P currently. Now, while the missions and objectives of the various teams conducting these digital learning experiments might be different, they all share the same ambition. In each case, we're all looking to recalibrate our human relationship with technology to help us individually and collectively realize more of our potential, and in doing so, fix some very serious human problems. In order to give some sense and order to the technology opportunities we all have in front of us today, we introduced the concept of a periodic table of digital elements. The table we discussed borrowed from the vision Mendeleev pioneered back in 1869 with the first publication of his elegant design. At the time, he stated his vision was an attempt towards a chemical conception of the ether. In our case, today, with our version of the periodic table, we're simply looking to suggest a way of ordering our business thinking about the various families of transformative technologies including AI, robotics, cyber, crypto, analytics, and human elements, importantly, all which have the potential to disrupt our lives and work. So last week, having briefly outlined our periodic table of digital elements, we discussed where we actually are today with regards to technology, and we put forward a view of how we actually got here to this point. To support our investigation of these important questions, we tried to connect two mutually supportive concepts. The first one, and perhaps better known, was Moore's law. And the second came from an ancient story about mathematics and the introduction of the game of chess, made relevant to the present age by the innovator and futurist Ray Kurzweil. Now, in combining these two concepts, Moore's law and the exponential story of the introduction of mathematics, we explored how over the last 50 years, we've seen the exponential growth of technology and its related innovations arrive at a point where it can explain the explosion of science fiction type technologies that we've seen over the last few years. Kurzweil's point with his story is that constant doubling, as predicted by Moore's law, reflecting exponential growth, is somewhat deceptive because it is initially unremarkable. By sharing the idea of a periodic table of digital elements and then looking at those elements through the lens of Moore's law and exponential growth, we were looking to provide a logical and practical view of what we might expect to see with regard to the evolving role of technology in our lives and works. Simply put, over the next few years, we can expect technology to reach further and deeper into how we work, and also to reshape key relationships that sit at the heart of how our organizations and communities actually think and act. Now, so over the last, as we said last week, and kind of just during this quick review, we've spoken about where we are today and how we got here. But what does that actually mean for how we teach and learn in the digital age? In order to answer that question, let's start by looking at the characteristics and principles of the digital networks that are connecting us as individuals, organizations, and communities right now, today. From there, we can look at the elements that arise from these digital networks and form the basis of how we will teach and learn in our digital age. Networks are a fundamental pattern of our lives. Wherever we see life, we see networks. Networks, in fact, create the shapes and structures of our society today. For example, in agrarian society, networks were predominantly local, orbiting around a local radius of workplace, place of worship, and family home, often all within a 10 or 15-kilometer radius. Then, in the industrial society, the gravitational pull of cities resulted in individuals and often entire families relocating within the same or different countries. Networks in industrial societies were more geographically dispersed. Henry Ford's production line philosophy didn't just deliver affordable cars, but influenced a one-size-fits-all approach to manufacturing, media, and indeed education that is being overturned in today's digital economy. Henry Ford's comments that people can have the Model T in any color so long as it's black is outdated in a world where we are moving from mass production to mass personalization, and from mass communication, we're on our way towards mass collaboration. Our world is neither flat nor round. It shapeshifts dynamically based on the networks we activate to share and receive information and experience. Electricity crackles with emotion. Me, you, we're all local and global. We're our own media as we spread our lives across computer networks that are governed by a different set of physics than the carbon-based world they were born into. Distance has a new relationship with time, and our relationship with ourselves, each other, and in fact the planet, is being redefined. Today, the activities that shape and sculpt human life are largely organized in global digital networks. Banking, production, media, entertainment, education, social communications. The nodes of our digital age are transforming the institutions and organizations of the industrial society into a global network that allows for the flow of information, experience, and identity inside and outside of national and organizational borders. Now, against this backdrop, in the same way that previous industrial revolutions changed our education systems, we need to change the way we teach and learn to fit how we live and work today in the digital age. Much is made of today's speed of change. I'm not that well positioned, in fact, to truly know if today's rate of change is markedly different from that experienced by other generations. However, in economics, for example, the curve of growth for the 100 years or so that it can be traced is pretty smooth and doesn't readily support claims of explosive change. Maybe, however, that's not really the point here. Perhaps the story I told earlier about technology entering the second half of the chessboard is more useful here. Early on the technology chessboard, humans felt that our designs and possibilities were governed or controlled by the elements of the physical world: earth, air, wind, and fire, which we were told were the fundamental elements of our existence. There was an idea that these elements had a will, and that will couldn't easily be bent to our own human designs and intentions. As we move, or as we have moved through the squares of the technology chessboard, we're breaking free somewhat from that reality. For most of history, we thought and acted upon physical realities. New physical realities were a result of inventions or technology. Every invention, from the wheel onward, has created new possibilities that didn't exist before. Earlier in our history and on the chessboard, inventions were fewer and farther between. They were departures from the norm. This infrequency gave us the time, or the perception of it, to make the required adjustments more slowly, or perhaps even unconsciously. The Industrial Revolution was just that, revolutionary, because it ran into a worldview that wasn't ready for it. Today, we don't see invention or technology as an accidental thing. In fact, we actively and deliberately plan for it. We foster and nurture it as a natural production line to new practices. My point here is that we might be far enough along the chessboard today that technology has come of age. The technology elements we have in our periodic table can be harnessed to create new possibilities and the desire to do so. These new possibilities lead to more choices, which in turn lead to more opportunities. And that is what I think might be causing our sense of being overwhelmed by technology and thinking that the speed of change has increased. Whatever has created all of this, the reality for our teams and organizations is that we need to mind the gaps created in our workforce and business strategies. In order to move from possibilities to opportunity, to choices, to action, we need new skills in new people and new places in a newly accelerated timeframe. This is where, in my opinion, digital learning and the toolkit it provides you and your teams with becomes an essential requirement. The way we taught and learned in the agrarian and industrial ages simply won't work for us in the digital economy. We need an education system that's at the same pH level as the world around it. The bottom line is that digital learning provides you with this capability. How effectively you teach and learn will determine how effectively we convert the challenges posed by technology into opportunities for sustainable growth. Just like the refrain or the motif on the London Underground, when stepping into the digital economy, you'll need to mind the gap. The gap is between the industrial and digital economies, between how your teams and organizations need to think about work, tasks and jobs, how you need to lead and manage yourself and teams, and the strategies you need to build and implement to bridge our industrial past and digital present. You'll also need to mind the gap between your business and your customers' expectations. Additionally, we need to mind the gap between how we're thinking and acting at different levels of our organization. The closer the alignment between board, CXO, management, employees and customers, the more effective we'll be at bridging our business into the new digital economy. So, if we accept that in order to take advantage of the opportunities of the digital age, we need to upgrade and change how we teach and learn, how should we go about approaching this important change? Here, I'd like to introduce, as you can see on this slide, I'd like to introduce an approach called reverse engineering the future, borrowed from my friend Steve Shepherd. I've used this process with a number of organizations, leading organizations over the last years, and found it to be particularly useful when we're looking to chart organizational path in uncertain times. Alan Kay, an early Silicon Valley influencer who, among many other things, helped create what became the laptop computer and the GUI, the graphical user interface, made the following important observation. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. Now that might sound like a clever thing to say, but what does it mean? It means that instead of beginning in the present and marching forward, these organizations start in the future by creating the vision they want to achieve, then march backwards, identifying and eliminating all of the obstacles that would otherwise impede their ability to reach the future state that they desire. However, unlike traditional scenario planning, which from our own experience we know often begins at time zero and extrapolates into some indeterminate future, this method of reverse engineering the future begins in the future and reverse engineers back to the present. The technique is based on the belief that attempts to reach the desired future outcome by extrapolating from the present will inevitably result in a quicksand effect that mires planners in the certainty of the past and the unyielding roots of the present. Therefore, it's critical that planners pick a point in the future that is far enough out that it becomes possible to let go of our present considerations. We can let go of the present and the past and make assumptions that are free from their grip. The goal of the reverse engineered future is to achieve a vision that everyone involved holds in high esteem and which all agree will move the organization forward in the best possible way. Now, this process has 5 key components: an achievable vision, a set of powerful organizational values, a desired mission, and completion date, a strategy for achieving that mission, a set of objectives required to enable the strategy, and finally, importantly, an action plan that facilitates reaching the objectives. Each of these components is different, yet somewhat related to the others. The vision is the statement of the desired end state. Critical to the creation of the vision is the willingness to let go of how things are done today and proceed as if the organization is being created for the very first time. The vision can be as far-reaching and dramatic as participants desire, provided it's achievable within an agreed time frame. Now, that time frame shouldn't be 5 or 10 years, but perhaps 1.5, 2 years, that type of time frame, something that we can actually feel and live towards. Values are perhaps the most critical and often underrated component in this reverse engineered future. Values define how your organization wants to be viewed by its customers, its peers, its partners, competitors, as well as employees. These values come from the heart as much as the head and define how the corporation should behave in the community, regardless of whether that community is a small town or the wider world. Most organizations have mission statements that they share widely with the world. While the vision makes us passionate about life, the mission makes us passionate about our jobs. Where the mission contains a statement of the desired set of accomplishments, the strategy contains a clear description of how the mission will in fact be achieved. This strategy can have various stages, but each has to build on the next, and each must have clear goals associated with it. Once the strategy has been formulated, objectives can be formulated and an action plan developed where all teams sign up to their commitments and responsibilities. This action plan needs to be managed closely and provides a blueprint for the delivery of key elements of your vision. Okay, so now that you and your team and your organization have their plan for reverse engineering its future, how can we build the digital learning strategy that's going to help you get there safely? Every single team's and organization's future and present are different. So it's not going to work to have a standard one-size-fits-all digital learning strategy. We're going to need personalized digital learning strategies that fit each company's unique realities. As an output from the digital teaching and learning experiments that we've conducted, we've developed a practical 4D model to help organizations build digital learning strategies that will help them get to their desired, preferred future state. The 4D model is built upon 4 elements: discovery, design, delivery, and data. We consider these to be the foundation of a successful digital learning strategy for your team, for your organization. This model allows us to craft a deliberately chosen track of forward movement as we develop a digital learning business strategy and a life cycle that realistically ensures its effectiveness and efficiency over the course of its lifetime. With this point, I'm trying to stress that a good digital learning strategy isn't one that just works for now and for the next 3 months. It has a longer kind of impact. And as we're supporting our reverse engineered future, it's very important that we're able to improve the skills, the qualities, the capabilities required to get there with all of the people who will be taking part in that journey. As we've said, a one-size-fits-all approach to digital learning simply won't work for most situations. It must be customized to meet the immediate, unique needs of each context. Your 4D model provides a structured approach that personalizes the digital learning strategy for each organization and each of your individual's needs. The discovery phase captures the required stakeholder outcomes. For example, the unique learner profiles, desirable or required exit level outcomes, you know, the types of things that people will be able to do at the end of the learning that they couldn't at the beginning. It will capture the learning objectives, preferred learner experiences. For example, time per learning module. You know, how much time do people have to invest? What's their preferred mix of teaching and learning tools and styles? What's the best evaluation criteria? What reporting and analytic requirements do you need? Then phase 2, design, relies on a design taxonomy that includes clearly defined asset, unit, module, program, and project level outcomes. Also covered is a framework for capturing the content that will be included in each learning asset, where activities will be conducted, what complementary, supplementary materials are available, what level of coaching and curation is required to ensure compliance with desired competencies and learning outcomes. The next phase, delivery, which is the implementation phase, kicks off long before the program goes live on your selected learning platform. You and your teams will have sculpted and crafted your digital programs based on the delivery capabilities of your digital platform and the people who are taking the programs, as well as the expectations and preferences of your various audiences and learners. Just because a learning experience is delivered in a digital or online format doesn't mean that it needs to be cold, impersonal, or low in emotional quotient. Our ambition must be quite the opposite with digital learning. Indeed, we need to find ways to bridge the emotion, energy, and engagement of the best physical learning experiences into the digital domain. We need to be able to reach out and to touch our digital learners, to be able to put a supporting arm around their shoulders when the learning is difficult, and pat them on the back when the learning has been completed well. We talk a lot in our organizations and our teams about hardware and software, for example, but when it comes to digital learning, we need to engage in a little bit of hardware to connect participants to their content in an intrinsically motivating manner that then increases their discretionary effort and supports improved outcomes. In the data phase of our 4D process, comprehensive program and participant data is assimilated from discovery through design to delivery. Data analytics are in fact the engine of our digital learning. They inform the continuous improvement of our digital programs and the growth of our portfolios. Data is both our compass and GPS in digital learning. It shows us both the direction in which we need to steer our programs and exactly where we are on that journey. Critically, data doesn't just inform our digital learning decisions, it also provides a strategic opportunity to connect our two worlds of learning, digital and physical. The data we collect in our digital learning activities can provide incredibly useful insights that improve how we structure and deliver learning, not just online, but also in our bricks and mortar classrooms. So, we began today's discussion by kind of reviewing the things that we covered last week. We talked then about how, if we accept that we have a periodic table of digital elements, and we accept that Moore's law and the concept of exponential growth have brought us to a point where technology is evolving and kind of growing further into our lives and work, if we accepted all of those points, we had to think about, well, what does that really mean for us today? And we spent a little bit of time just charting and outlining the progression I think we've seen in our families, with our parents, with our grandparents, where we've seen a transition, and we still see the transition from agrarian to industrial to digital components of our society. We spoke a little bit about how that transition and that journey potentially creates gaps in our organization and how we need to mind those gaps, bridge them, if you will. We also then looked at the idea of reverse engineering our future. So we took on board kind of Alan Kay's comment around the best way to predict the future is to create it, a very empowering type of idea. And built on the idea that we're transitioning, or we have transitioned, or we are transitioning from industrial to digital societies, we made the point that perhaps just simply in a linear way, extending the way that we build our strategies isn't going to be successful. We actually need to reinvent, rethink, create our organizations anew. And with all of that, with that creation and that reinvention, we need new skills, new capabilities in new people, new places, existing people as well, and existing places, of course, as well. And we introduced the 4D model, which allows all of us, irrespective of our team or organization, to build a personalized digital strategy. Do you remember we spoke about the invention of the production line? We mentioned Mr. Ford's kind of comment around you can have a Model T in any color you wish as long as it's black. That's just not going to work for us today. Our situations, our networks are more nuanced, and therefore we need to teach and learn in different ways. And so just taking a step back for a second, what I'd like you to kind of consider is that last week we talked about the evolving role of technology in our lives and works. Today, we've talked about how we might think about harnessing the technologies in our digital periodic table, how we can harness them to kind of create a new future. And then next week, we're going to talk in more detail around how we actually apply digital learning in our team, in our own lives, in our teams, in our organizations, and at a city and community and societal level as well. So at this point, I'd like to pass back to the team. Firstly, of course, say thank you for your attention and kind of patience this morning. A big thank you from me. And then if there are any questions, I'll try and provide some answers. If we don't get to cover all of the questions, or you have any other questions, please let the team know and they'll forward them to me. And then over the next 24 hours, I'll provide responses. Okay, so thank you again. I'll pass it back to the team.
Thank you, Professor. Hello, everyone. This is Rita speaking. I'll be the intermediary between the professor and you guys. The first question is, a very interesting one. How can we predict the future to define the appropriate strategy?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? How can we predict the future?
The future to define an appropriate strategy.
Yeah. So I'll share these slides with you in a PDF format, and you can go back and look. In fact, let me just do that quickly. Oh, excuse me. If I just go back super quickly to look at this slide here around reverse engineering the future. The point that I was trying to make is that in terms of it's funny. I have a colleague who kind of says the problem isn't predicting the future; it's kind of knowing when it's going to happen. Okay, so that's a bit of a funny way of looking at it. But the point here around Alan Kay's comment is we have to take responsibility, each of us, to create the future that we want. Now, particularly in times of big transformations, there are lots of challenges, aren't there? With those challenges, there are also opportunities. And one of the opportunities is to think about doing things slightly differently. So one of the ways to approach this with the reverse engineering idea is that you have to sit down and kind of list out the scenarios of what you want your future to be. Now, you have to be careful, of course, that it has to be ambitious, but not crazy. Yeah, it has to be kind of a stretch, but it has to be just about kind of something you might get close to achieving. And then the important thing about it, you can have all of the capabilities in the world and all of the rest of it, and you can hire lots of people, but it's actually your values that very often get you to the right place. Okay, so in terms of defining the future, it's really interesting to think about, what is it that your company or your team does really well today? What are you recognized for? Is it integrity? Is it innovation? Is it hard work? Whatever those values are, they are going to be the foundations of how you get to the future. You have to build a vision that's based on your values. You know, whether you're OCP, UM6P, ABS, MIT, whatever. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning and be able to create Apple, for example, yeah? But I might be able, using the values of my team, to create a better future than the one I'm going to inherit if I just sit here and wait for it to happen. So all of this is a bit of a call to arms. It's kind of saying, okay, you want to predict your future, then create it. So Geeta, I hope that's a bit of an effort at answering that question. I'll be happy to provide further information, you know, on that if useful to the team.
Sure. Should I move on to the second question?
Please,
yeah. So the second question is how to balance between the e-learning and the formal training.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm just making a note so I don't forget the question. Okay, so I think what's being implied here is kind of getting the balance right between online or digital learning and formal training in the sense of in-person, physical world type of training. And the first thing I would say is it's very important that please don't let ourselves fall into the trap of seeing digital learning as something separate from physical world learning. Ultimately, learning is about having a learning objective and then being able to complete that. And whether that gets completed, that learning objective gets completed with a digital kind of intervention or a physical one isn't really so important, okay? Digital and physical are just delivery mechanisms in lots of ways. But the person who asked this question it's very insightful because it's about getting the balance right. It's about picking the right mechanism to satisfy the right objective. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean. If for example, you had a learning objective where you needed to train 1,000 people on a basic type of skill or a statutory obligation or a legislative kind of thing, then an online type of learning activity in a broadcast type of form would allow you to kind of share that learning objective, get people to do it in a lot more effective, efficient way than if you had to bring 1,000 people into a physical classroom, okay? So that's kind of one example. But we have to be careful again, not to think of this in terms of either or. I'd much rather you think about this as an and type of question. So how do we create the correct hybrid kind of learning solutions where you combine the best of physical learning? Because, you know, there's lots of great stuff about meeting together with people. It's very motivating, it's very exciting, it's very great when it's done well. So I'm not suggesting that digital learning is the only thing we can do, but when you have to learn quickly, when you have to change skill sets quickly, when you need to be continuously learning, so between physical kind of learning experiences, how can you best apply physical and digital together? When we meet next week, I'll talk about what I call a double helix. So I've got this concept or this metaphor of the double helix that kind of creates a combined solution of physical and digital learning together. Okay, so again, Geeta, I hope that's the beginning of an answer for our colleague.
So we already reached the time frame, the 40-minute time frame of the class. Would you humor us with one last question? And then for all the other, I'll be sending you questions, and then I'll diffuse them to the participants right away. Should we do
thank you.
Last question then?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. What is the difference between reverse innovation and reverse engineering in the digital age?
Okay. Okay, the difference between reverse engineering and reverse innovation in the digital age. Okay, so what I'm getting at here is it's almost a combination of both, in fact, yeah? But whether it's reverse engineering in the sense that what we're doing fundamentally here is we're creating a kind of a destination and we're working backwards from it. What's important with that is when you're kind of walking backwards, so you and your team identify your preferred scenario, your preferred outcome for 2 years from now, okay? What you actually do is you walk back and you think, well, what are the types of things that can actually stop me from achieving this, okay? You're actually thinking about this in the sense that not just kind of what skills do I need, what people do I need, what capabilities where, et cetera, you're thinking about what are all the things that can actually stop this from happening, okay? And then you kind of come up with almost a risk mitigation plan that allows you to kind of say, well, if this happens, this is the person who's going to be responsible, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to kind of counteract all of these things. And in fact, whether it's reverse engineering or reverse innovation, it's simply about having more control, being in more control of your destiny, of shaping where you're going to get to and how you're going to get there. The example I would give is just simply, I think we've all experienced this because, you know, we're all impacted by disruptive technologies and disruptive business models and what have you. One of the biggest challenges is not losing time or losing energy worrying about what's going on. How many times have we been in meetings where we have our team members, our colleagues, looking for some direction, looking for some support around where the future sits and how we're going to get there? This process gives you that. It gives you a sense of how you're going to talk about the future and how you're going to get there. But ultimately, and this is a very important point, I think, is that all of these conversations, yeah, technology is important, but ultimately it's a question of leadership and vision. You know, how are you going to create a vision, get people to support it, and move with you towards creating that? And so this is a process that kind of just gives you a bit more structure around doing that. So Geeta, I'll be happy to kind of expand upon the answers I've given to those 3 questions and answer any others. If you'd like to forward me an email with them, I'll get them back to you within 24 hours.
Of course, I'll do so. I guess it's time to wrap up this session. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you for the audience for their participation. Would you have some closing word for them?
My only closing word was kind of everybody stay well, of course. And yeah, look forward to kind of speaking with you kind of next week. And it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you in this way. So thank you all. Thanks.
Okay. Well, goodbye, everyone. Until next week, stay safe.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.